Hello, and welcome to this Islamic History and Thought lecture series. This session is organized by the Institute of Ismaili Studies. Thank you for joining us today. My name is Orkan Mirkasimov. I'm an associate professor at the Institute of Ismaili Studies. And it is my pleasure to introduce our speaker and discussant. And thank you for being with us today. Professor Paul Walker is our speaker today. Paul Walker is well known for his outstanding work on Ismaili intellectual history. And of course, he is also a regular guest for this lecture series. He has many publications on Ismaili and Fatimid topics, among them Early Philosophical Shiism, The Advent of the Fatimids, Orations of the Fatimid Caliphs, Master of the Age, and most recently, the Fatimids select papers on their governing institutions, social and cultural organization, religious appeal, and rivalries. He is currently Deputy Director for Academic Programs at the Center for Middle Eastern Studies, University of Chicago. Dr. Fârès Gillon is our discussant today. Fârès Gillon is Maître de Conférence in Islamic Studies and Arabic Language at Aix-Marseille University. He obtained his doctorate in Arab and Islamic Studies from the École Pratique des Hautes Études. His recent publications include the Book of Unveiling, Early Fatimid Ismaili Doctrine in the Kitab al-Kashf, attributed to Ja'far ibn Mansur al-Yaman. His research focuses primarily on Fatimid Ismailism, especially in its relationship with its Shia roots and with the parallel tradition of Nusayrism, on which he has published several scholarly works. He is also interested in the history of ideas in Islam and Islamic philosophy. He co-edited with Mathieu Terrier a bilingual anthology of philosophy in Islam, which has been now published last year in 2025. And of course, a couple of years ago, Fârès was a research associate at the Institute of Ismaili Studies and was actually running this same lecture series. To give you an idea of timelines, we will start with Professor Walker's talk, which will last between 30 and 40 minutes, followed by a discussion led by Dr. Gillon, and then questions from the audience. So the whole session should take between 1 hour and 1 hour and 30. A reminder to the audience, if you want to ask a question, please use the Q&A box at the bottom of the screen. And not the chat, because we won't be able to monitor the chat. The title of today's talk is The Bitterly Contested Succession to the Fatimid Imam al-Mustansir. So they're reassessing the Fatimid succession history. And with this, I pass the floor to Professor Walker.
Yes, well, greetings from very cold Chicago. But my thanks to to Professor Mir Kazimov for the invitation and for the Institute. It's nice to be back in London, but in reality, of course, I'm in Chicago. But let me begin with a kind of personal note. Normally, when I give a public lecture to an important audience, one of the things I notice is that my fingers become very cold before I start to speak. But I've, over the years, discovered that's a good sign. Usually I do well if that's the way it's begun. But today it's bloody cold here, and my fingers are frozen because in my office even, it's very bitter cold. But we'll proceed in any case, and maybe the topic itself will warm us up a little bit. So we'll begin with the simple fact, during the night of December 29 in the year 1094, the Imam Caliph al-Mustansir died. It was the end of a very long reign, one of the longest of any ruler in the Islamic history. It had seen the high point of Fatimid achievement in capturing and for a while holding Baghdad, for example, but also the low point when in the Ayyam Shidda, when the dynasty nearly came to an end. But by the time of his death, the Fatimids had recovered their standing and were in very good condition, partly thanks to the efforts of the Wazir Badr al-Jamali. But what was to happen with the succession and its dispute, and it became extremely bitter and nasty, including almost an internal civil war, pitting one faction of the Ismailis against another, was one of the most complex and difficult moments in the whole long history of Ismailism. It left in the historical record all kinds of interesting details, and to sort those out is a complicated task because it's so complex and there's so much to deal with. What I hope to accomplish today is to bring some clarity to all of the material that is there to be found and to be discussed. But I fear, in fact, in the long run, I may be making it more complicated. So I'll proceed as best I can and hope that it is somewhat clear to the audience. If there are questions, they can be asked at the end, and I'll try to make it even clearer. The death in this particular case set off an intense, as the title of my talk says, a bitterly disputed succession. But let's go back to the basics here. So for Nizari Ismailis, the basic point is that in their mind, in their belief, the Imam, al-Mustansir, designated his oldest son, Nizar, to succeed him. The Mustaʿlis or Tayyibis Ismailis deny that there was any such designation, and they say instead that on his deathbed, the Imam, that is al-Mustansir, designated his very youngest son, Abul Qasim Ahmad, to succeed, which he subsequently did. Now, you can see that there is automatically a very serious conflict. What I've been interested in is trying to trace out of the historical record any discussion of this, any evidence that we can find one way or another. I'm a professional historian. I don't have a stake in either going one way or another. So what I would like to do is to present as much information as I can, and then I'll discuss it and to a certain extent analyze it for the audience. Where this body of information sits, as I say in the historical record, it has attracted considerable attention from scholars like myself or Samuel Stern, but also anybody who comments on the long history of the Ismailis. When I was at a conference here at the Institute 3, maybe 4 years ago, I noted one particular just interesting detail was that in the written work of two of our most eminent authorities on the history of the Ismailis, Bernard Lewis and Farhad Daftari, both of them simply say that the Imam, al-Mustansir, designated Nizar. What is remarkable in these cases is they don't then point to any fact or any source or anything to verify what they're saying. It is if they just simply, as any Nizari might say, we believe that he designated him, and they are then confirming that he designated him as to succeed. I challenge that to say, but they should have said when the designation took place, it was at this point on this day or this year or something, and he said X, Y, and Z. And that does not exist in their written comment on this particular problem. I think at a conference, I think it was just almost exactly a year ago, Khalil Andani, in his presentation to that particular conference, began by offering what I think he was suggesting was a correction to my point of view. At least, let me apologize first if I've misunderstood what he was saying or what he was doing. I don't have a copy of his presentation. I've listened to it a couple of times. What he and I seem to be doing is mixed messaging. I'm interested in some detail to say, okay, on day such and such, the Imam said such and such and designated Nizar. In his presentation, he is noting a number of medieval authorities who take the Nizari point of view and say, yes, he designated him. But the fact is that Ibn Khaldun, as great as he was, if he simply says that he designated Nizar without offering any evidence or any particular event, then he and Farhad Daftari are on an equal basis. I mean, they have the same validity in this particular issue. The exception in Andani's presentation is he correctly pointed out that the medieval historian Ibn al-Athir, in a comment in his history, says that Hassan-i-Sabah, the famous Hassan-i-Sabah, went to Egypt, and there he held discussions with the Imam, al-Mustansir, and that in the course of those discussions, Hassan asked the Imam, who will be my Imam after you? And that, according to the report of Ibn al-Athir, the Imam replied to indicate that it would be Nizar. That's the kind of information that one has to pay attention to here. But there are some issues here that need to be brought out or at least discussed. So let me present them. For one thing, if that report from Ibn al-Athir is in fact valid and authentic, it raises a couple of issues. One of which is that the report says that Hassan went to Egypt and he met and had conversations with the Imam. In the rest of the report, it says that the Imam urged Hassan to return to Khorasan and there to institute a daʿwa, an appeal, in his, that is al-Mustansir's name. That's odd because it was already in existence. Why would the Imam ask him to go back and do it again or whatever? Anyway, whatever that is. The more serious issue is that that would have happened in the year 1086. There is another account of Hassan going to Egypt, which is the one most authorities kind of pick and choose as the real one. And that would have him going to Egypt in 1079. And on that, which is recorded in something called the Sargozasht, it's a biography or a hagiography of Hassan himself. It claims he went to Egypt, he spent maybe 2 or 3 years there, He never got to see the Imam at all. He ran afoul of Badr al-Jamali, and then eventually he was forced to leave without seeing the Imam. Maybe there are two trips, but there seems to be a conflict here. The further minor detail, but it's worth, at least I should mention it, is does this kind of casual conversation in this particular case constitute what is called a designation, in Arabic, a nas? That's what's required in the transfer of the imamate from the previous imam to the next imam. In other words, the previous imam should actually designate in some kind of obvious way his successor. Does the report in Ibn al-Athir constitute a designation? I'm not going to take a stand on this. I'm just pointing out that it could be questioned. So the issue then is this idea of designation. And so what I would like to do to turn to here now is amongst all of the material that I have collected, Stern collected, and others have collected on this very matter of this succession and its incredible complications, but also its importance, because this results in the split of the Ismaili community into two competing sides. It was a tragedy in many ways, and it became bloody, and it involved warfare and all kinds of things like that. So let me now add, and I have examined a lot of the evidence one way or another in a previous publication. But more recently, I came across one that I and Stern had ignored. We just didn't think that it would be there. So I'm going to pull it up on my screen and explain as I do what's involved. All right. What I am presenting to you is a new, or at least an unused, or as I say, a neglected piece of evidence that's critical in our examination of this issue. And it comes from a work called The History of the Patriarchs of the Coptic Church, or another title is History of the Patriarchs of the Egyptian Church. That is a work that was written over the centuries by various people, and it's a collection of patriarch by patriarch by patriarch. It begins way back when the authors were writing in Coptic. But by the 11th century, it's entirely in Arabic. So the people who contributed the biographies to the later period are all writing in Arabic. What we want in this particular work, let me say, first of all, that one of the reasons why we didn't look at it is because if you read some of this work, you realize that it's mostly concerned with the history of the Coptic Church and the internal disputes and politics of patriarchate within the church. So why would it have anything to do with events outside of the church's purview? But in this particular case, what we're looking at is the entry for the Patriarch Michael IV.
Excuse me, Paul, are you sharing the screen?
I thought I was.
No, it's not yet visible.
It's not showing? Okay.
No.
Let's click on this. Is it working now?
Not yet.
All
So
right.
what you need to do, to click on the share screen and then to select first the text you want to share.
Okay,
and then share screen.
Okay, let me go back then. Okay, share. Is it there?
Yes, it works. You only need to maximize it.
Okay, now we're okay?
Yes, perfect.
All right, very good. Okay, So let me repeat again. It's the history of the patriarchs of the Coptic Church. We're interested in the biography of a particular patriarch who is Patriarch Michael IV, who ruled or governed the Coptic Church in Egypt from 1092 to 1104. So that includes the critical year of the death of Imam al-Mustansir, 1094. Here in this particular work, we find the following passage. And let me explain that the author is a man we know the name, but he's also known as Ibn al-Khulzumi, the clerk, al-Katib. We also realized that he was extremely well connected, but he is a lay Copt. He's not a religious. He's not a priest or anything like that. So he's a clerk. It's somewhere in the bureaucracy. What he describes is, I think, probably not eyewitness. I don't think he saw what he reports, but he almost certainly knew somebody who saw it. So his evidence is really sound as far as we can tell. Moreover, it is the oldest we have. So when some of this looks familiar, if you know the subject, you know al-Maqrizi, the famous historian al-Maqrizi's account of the same events. But Maqrizi's much later. This man lived at the time that it happened. So when the succession took place in Egypt, this man was there. So this is probably the best personal account of some kind that we have. So let me read the key passages as I go, and we can discuss later. Okay. The Caliph al-Mustansir Billah, commander of the faithful, died on the eve of December 29, 1094. I've already said that. Okay, critical part. During his illness, he had charged his sister, the noble lady, as-Sayyida al-Sharifa, and the Lord, the illustrious al-Afdal is the wazir, on that night that his young son, Abul Qasim Ahmad, should sit on the throne in the kingdom in his stead. That is, the man is saying outright that at that night, the Imam al-Mustansir said that my successor will be his youngest son, Abul Qasim Ahmad. Okay, it continues. At that moment, the death is known. Al-Afdal rode that night straight away to the palace, and he clothed the aforesaid youth in the robes of the caliphate and the pearl. There's a pearl that goes in the regalia of the Imam, and it sits on his forehead. Okay. He, that is Abul Qasim Ahmad, sat on the throne of his father, and he was surnamed al-Mustaʿlis Billah, the commander of the faithful. His age at that time was 17 years, and his paternal aunt, the noble lady, sent to the elder sons of her brother, and they were Nizar, Abdullah, and Ismail, and she informed them of the death of their father. When they were come, that is to the palace, they saw their young brother sitting with the insignia of the caliphate. They were vexed, and they refused to acknowledge this. The Lord al-Afdal said to them, "Kiss the ground before our master al-Mustaʿlis Billah, commander of the faithful, and recognize him as caliph. For he it is whom our master al-Mustansir Billah, before his death, charged that he should be caliph after him." But they refused to recognize him as caliph. Each one of them said that his father had promised him that he should be the caliph after him. Then Nizar, who was the eldest of the brothers, said, "By God, if my head were to be cut off, I would not recognize him in the caliphate, who is younger than I am, nor would I consent to his priority over me, because our master said to me many times that I should be the caliph after him. And I have his written statement for this. Lo, I shall bring it to you straight away." and he went out quickly to bring the document to them. But when he was back in his house, he rode off straightway, and he took with him at that time those of his pages, that is Ghulam, who were present, and he journeyed through the night. The news reached the Lord al-Afdal, that is the wazir, and he sent Laytha Dawla, the high chamberlain, and with him a large body of horsemen to seize him, that is Nizar, and to bring him back. They followed in his traces, but they did not overtake him, nor did they know which way he had taken. Continuing. When al-Afdal learned of the departure of Nizar, he seized his brothers, the two others, Abdallah and Ismail, and he placed with each one of them 10 men to guard him. I won't read all of this, but the key passage here now. After some days, it was manifest that Nizar had gone to the city of Alexandria. And the conclusion here. On January the 11th, 1095, our master al-Mustaʿlis rode in Cairo with the umbrella and a fine dress and much adornment, and the like of which had not been seen. And Nizar rode in Alexandria with the umbrella also, and was surnamed al-Mustafa Ladinallah. Okay, that's basically the report that we get from this particular source. Now, what's interesting, a number of things in there. For one thing, the role of the sister. Most historians, until we have this kind of information, thought, almost an obvious fact, that what had happened was that the Wazir al-Afdal had staged a coup to prevent Nizar from succeeding, and that he had chosen the youngest son because the youngest son would have offered the least conflict with his own agenda. What mitigates that a little bit is the role of the sister, because if the sister is the main person involved in this, she was with the Imam when he died, and she is then reporting what his choice was, or so it would seem. There is a lot more to be added to this, and let me try to add some of it as we go here. The issue partly can be complicated by trying to figure out exactly what al-Afdal is involved in doing. But basically what happens is that they find out that Nizar had left this conclave where he discovered what had happened and he was being excluded from the succession. He went to his house and he gathered his people and he left and he went to Alexandria. And there he set up or continued his claim to be the succeeding Imam. That's a fact. What happens is that then we've got two Imam Caliphs, Mustaʿlis in Cairo and Nizar in Alexandria. And that then becomes the conflict, which basically happens in the following way. So Nizar is quite successful initially in setting up, because when he went to Alexandria, and it's interesting that he went to Alexandria because he had to know that if he went to that particular city, he would find people who were on his side and would back him up. This is not to say that he didn't have people in Cairo, but he knew that he didn't control Cairo because the Cairo was certainly under the control of al-Afdal, who was had acted in order to install al-Mustaʿlis. In Alexandria, Nizar had the backing of a man named Ibn Masal al-Lukki, a wealthy emir, and he must have known him from before, as well as the military governor of Alexandria, al-Aftakin, and the Qadi of the city, and probably many of the inhabitants of the city itself who backed Nizar and his Imamate. initially, they were quite successful in controlling their territory and in even collecting taxes from the vicinity in the delta nearer to them. Al-Afdal made as soon as he realized what had happened, he made an attempt with what military he could to put down the rebellion, or from his perspective, it was a rebellion, to put it down, but he failed. In fact, his initial attempts did not succeed at all. Nizar and his side were victorious. But in the long run, and this is now in 1095, in the long run, al-Afdal had the wealth and the power and could use the money he had plus his status as, in effect, de facto ruler of Egypt to bring a superior force, which he did. And it took him 9-10 months, but eventually he attacked Alexandria, put it under siege in such a way that its interior conditions deteriorated and Nizar's position weakened steadily. And finally, Ibn Masala Luki left, and with it, his money. And then finally, Aftakin, the military governor, and Nizar asked for a safe passage from al-Afdal. According to our Coptic source, al-Afdal was perfectly willing to grant the safe passage. And he took under captivity Nizar and Aftakhin, and he sent them back to Cairo. He told them, go back to Cairo, but wait on the outskirts. Do not try to enter the city until I get there, because I want to make sure that you are safe. However, what happened, according to this account, which is interesting, is that when Nizar and his companion entered into the royal presence, Mustaʿlis, the other Imam, refused to see him and condemned him to death. And eventually he died in captivity. That's according to that source. Now, my interest in kind of further in this analysis concerns a couple of things, one of which I'm curious as to how Nizar knew that Alexandria would be a safe place for him. This is speculation. We don't have anybody who actually says. I named the people there who were in power, who were on his side. Did he have a long-standing connection with them? We don't know. Now, one of the things in this conflict is that Nizar was about 50 at this point. He was an adult. He had a long chance to be, and the eldest son of the Imam. So it was presumed that he would succeed by a lot of people. He had a chance to make connections and form some kind of coterie that would support him. But it was in Alexandria where it actually worked. Now, I just put out a little speculation. Badr al-Jamali, the famous military dictator, if you like, of Fatimid Egypt in this period, had attacked Alexandria twice in a brutal fashion. My theory is that the people in Alexandria hated the family of Badr al-Jamali, of which his son is al-Afdal. So he would naturally they would be inclined to support anybody, and Nizar was an obvious chance. A couple of other details on this, on the Nizari side of this issue. There are a couple more to be added, but okay. I'm curious as to what actually happened in Alamut. We know in the long run, of course, that Hassan supported Nizar. That's not in question. But when and what did he announce? I'm particularly interested in when. Nizar was actually Imam in charge of a territory for 10 months. Did Hassan Isabah at that point announce in favor of Nizar? It's just speculation, a curious question. In the long run, of course, they must have. But we don't, as far as I know, have any record of anybody having said anything. A final curious detail to me is that when they begin to mint coins at Alamut, those coins have the name Imam al-Mustafa Ladin-Allah Nizar on them. But Nizar was long dead by then. I don't know. It's just a fact that's kind of interesting. I will leave the further history of the Nizaris to other people who know more than I do. But that's part of that side of it. Additional details, and let's go back to Cairo. It is clear that we have a couple of reports that indicate that Nizar and al-Afdal, that is Nizar, the 50-year-old eldest son of the Imam, and the Wazir at this point, are about the same age and they hate each other. There are reports of when a conflict occurred. One more detail in this whole mess that is coming about is that the Abul Qasim Ahmad, this young 17-year-old who succeeds as a Mustaʿlis, there was a point before this, maybe arranged by Badr al-Jamali or by his son al-Afdal, of a marriage between this Abul Qasim Ahmad and a daughter of Badr al-Jamali. There is a little bit of information in the record. We know that apparently the marriage was arranged, that there was a banquet at one point at which the marriage was being recognized. There's no evidence that the marriage was ever consummated, or that there is a child or an offspring from that marriage. Mustaʿlis had a couple of sons, but we don't know that any of those sons were related to Badr al-Jamali in that sense. Just a little detail. There is another report that says that al-Afdal, the Wazir, in order to prevent any of the other sons from gaining recognition or a designation by their father, prevented them from seeing him. Now, this would be in the final months of al-Mustansir's life. So when illness began to be obvious, that al-Afdal prevented them from getting to see their father, so the father could make no designation or something. These are just rumors. We can't verify it, but it's kind of an interesting detail to put into the whole confused situation, if you like. On the Mustaʿlis side, what happens is that initially, al-Afdal, when he finally, by the end of 1095, has settled the military and captured, and then probably in some way managed to, we don't know exactly how Nizar died, but we presume, and our Coptic source says, yes, he did die in captivity. What was the role of al-Afdal in doing that? I don't know, or in the Imam Mustaʿlis. But al-Afdal then controlled Egypt, most certainly, with an iron fist like his father. There is no sign of particular resistance or pro-Nizari activity, although we have to presume it exists. It wasn't just Alexandria that was in favor of Nizar's succession. It was other people in Egypt who presumed it. I will add here, what's interesting too is that the second son in that list of Abdallah had his own following. There were people who thought Abdallah would succeed. Al-Afdal suppressed it violently to make sure that nobody continued to believe that by executing anybody who seemed to be in favor of it. Well, the issue died down to a certain extent in Egypt, but it emerged when there is the assassination of al-Afdal himself in 1121. It is said that Nizari assassins had come from the east and had actually taken revenge and assassinated al-Afdal. We don't know. There is also the claim that maybe the Imam himself was tired of this guy's tyranny, or something like that. But that's the way it is projected, and it seems to have been the way people in Egypt thought. That is, the elite thought that the assassins were coming from the east and that they were dangerous. So what happens to counter that is that the government stages a very elite meeting, an assembly, particularly of those people who might be high enough to be controlling any parts of the government. They assemble, and that assembly is the main purposes of that is to counter any Nizari claims. The chief person involved and the chief thing in the assembly is to find a sister of Nizar, one of his own sisters, to denounce him, which he does in this public manner. So she says, no, my brother did not have the designation, something like that. That is obviously a piece of propaganda for Egypt in order to counter any Nizari claims. That meeting is, first of all, a meeting, but then it is given to the head of the chancellery, and he writes up a document with the same arguments. That document is called al-Hidayah al-Amariyah because it's supposed to support the Caliph, Mustaʿlis' son, al-Amariyah. When you look at the account of the assembly or the account in the Hidayah, it is full of all sorts of propaganda garbage. We know that it just mixes some facts that may be okay with facts that we know are simply wrong. But in any case, that is obviously where the Mustaʿlis Tayyibi branch makes its best claim. And it's the claim that they most take seriously in their opposition. So let me maybe conclude here. I'm not sure I've made anything perfectly clear, and I may have simply confused everybody. And if that's the case, I'd be glad to try to answer questions and see if I can make it even clearer. It is a bundle of historical information that we glean from a lot of sources. They are trying, some of them, polemically to refute others. So it's full of polemic, it's full of innocent, but it's a fascinating, but as I say, a bitterly contested moment in the history of the Ismailis. Fascinating to try to untangle, let's put it that way. So thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Paul. It's a fascinating story with many questions embedded in it. I will probably pass the floor to Dr. Gillon without further ado. Please, Fârès.
Thank you very much, Orhan. Thank you again for the invitation. And thank you, Paul, for this very thought-provoking presentation. I have a lot of questions, but I'll try to keep it short. And maybe I'll start with a simple one. This history of the patriarchs that you mentioned, so was not really taken into account by modern scholarship, but do we know if it was used as a source by Muslim chroniclers or non-Muslim ones, but for that matter, like in later sources, for example, al-Makrizi or other. Do we know if this was used as a source?
Let me answer quickly. That's one of my biggest questions, but I don't have an answer. It just looks like it had to be, but we don't know that Makrizi would have had access to it. There's too much that seems the same, and yet there are differences. So I don't know.
But as far as you can see, I mean, there are here some details that you can't find anywhere else, right?
Yes, yes.
And other sources, later sources, also do not seem to rely on this one because their narrative is quite different.
Yes. My assumption is that that our author of the particular part that I showed, this Ibn al-Khuzumi, wrote it for a Coptic audience, even if it's in Arabic, and that he was using as a common account, which then passed to Makrizi and other people. That Makrizi didn't actually read the history of the patriarchs, but he had another source. So the common source. That's the best I can do.
All right. Thank you. So, I mean, as is quite obvious, the main matter here is that the matter of succession, which is very interesting to me because this seems to be a recurring problem in Fatimid Ismailism and in Shiism in general. And I was just actually thinking of Marshall Hudson's article on how did the early Shia become sectarian, something like that. And his contention was that under the Imamate of Ja'far Sadiq, there were three notions that were put forward by that Imam that helped consolidate the Shia community of the time. And among these concepts were ilm, knowledge, taqiyya, dissimulation or secrecy, and nas. And this always struck me as something very strange, because if Ja'far was the one who instituted nas, so official designation of his successor, then how come that his succession was so, well, to take your own words, bitterly discussed, right?
Yes.
And why was there a split between the Ismailis and the Imamis, or proto-Ismailis and proto-Imamis at the time? And here it seems that we have the same issue. I mean, it's very strange that we have no trace whatsoever of Nizar's designation as successor. So how? Yeah. So maybe one question would be how do we account for the lack of an unequivocal designation of Nizar in the sources?
Well, what I wanted to say, and I should have remembered to put in there, the one thing we do have in the case of Nizar is his own testimony. That is, we have the report that he says, I have been designated. So it's a private designation, but he said he had a document. That's another thing. We don't know what happened to the document because he doesn't seem to reappear. But if he had a document from his father saying you will succeed, what value does that have? Yeah, the whole history of the designation among the Shia is very interesting.
Yes, and also, I mean, wouldn't that designation be public, theoretically?
Well, there is the explicit designation and the implicit designation. There is the private designation. So, I mean, we all know that in the current situation among the Dawoodi Bohras, the Qutbuddins insist that the designation was made by the Dai privately.
Yes, but I mean the context is a bit different because here we're dealing with a head of state. So in the case of al-Mustansir, I mean.
Yeah, in many ways. So in fact, so Nizar is claiming he has a document, And then when we get to the Hadaya al-Amariya, the counter argument is that among the Ahlul Bayt, we don't use documents. So you can't make a designation of a successor by writing a will.
I mean, this whole point that Nizar makes in the source that you're in Ibn al sorry, what's his name?
Kalzumi.
Kalzumi, yeah. I mean, this whole argument sounded a bit strange to me. I mean, that he relies on the document rather than official or public designation, and it does seem kind of weak. Like it's a weak claim if it's only in a document that he has to go and get from his house. So that means that he's the only one to be aware that he's been designated as a successor, which doesn't, yeah. So maybe that would be that also might be an effect of some of the sources. I mean, maybe the sources don't want to tell us that Nizar was officially designated. In the case of this source in particular, it's the author is very favorable to al-Mustaʿlis and al-Afdal. So
particularly al-Afdal, he says extremely nice things about al-Afdal. I have a suspicion that he wrote this particular history while al-Afdal was still alive. So right. he wanted to make sure he remained in good stead with the boss. But you're pointing out one of these facts that are just very interesting. And it became. Yeah, I mean,
it raises the general problem of designation. What are the criteria? What are the formally how does it take place? Does it have to be public? Does it have to be written?
Yes,
do we need witnesses? What kind of witnesses, etc. And it seems that the Fatimids. I mean, I love the Fatimids, but I'm sorry to say that it seems like they don't learn because they had these issues before, and with al-Mu'izz, right?
So what happens in the various earlier cases is, and al-Mu'izz is a very, very good example. So what we know is that he had 4 sons, and the oldest son, Tamim, would have been a natural successor as long as the Imam lived in any way. But they discovered he couldn't produce offspring. We don't know what was wrong with him, but he couldn't. So once they discovered that, they passed him by, and they picked the next son, Abdullah. And Abdullah was apparently secretly designated, but not formally. So it wasn't public. And then all of a sudden, a month before the death of al-Mu'izz, Abdullah died. So al-Aziz was the 3rd son, and he was he then came in to this situation. But it wasn't publicly known that Abdullah had actually been designated, so it wasn't a problem.
But it's I mean, because if we follow the practice instaured by the first Fatimid Caliph, I mean, he designated his successor as early as a year after he came to power, and
right.
and his successor only took power 20 years after he was designated as a successor. So this is a very strong model, and why wasn't this applied in all following successions?
Well, it's a totally interesting question, and everybody was actually worried about the case of Jafar as-Sadiq, because if he designated Ismail and Ismail died before the father, then that means the father wasn't Masum, infallible, and on and on.
Should we move to the questions from the audience?
Okay. Sure. Maybe I had a couple more questions, if I may, but I'll try and keep it short.
Okay, go ahead.
I actually had a question about the Iranian consequences of this succession, because so the official idea is that the Iranians split from the Fatimid daʿwa because they refused to acknowledge al-Mustaʿlis as caliph, and they preferred Nizar. And I wanted your opinion. Do you think this is enough? Like, is this an argument that is strong enough to explain why a whole dawa refused to acknowledge Mustaʿlis and splits from Egypt? Or are there other factors, maybe economic or political or?
I'm not sure about the other factors, but it certainly makes clear that they went with Nizar, and they had no reason to want to go with Egypt under al-Afdal. But beyond that, I'm not sure that I can say much of anything.
So you're suggesting that al-Afdal was the problem?
The Badr al-Jamali and al-Afdal, for example, Farhad Daftari has said this a couple of times, that when Hassan Sabah went to Egypt, he discovered that the current administration had no particular interest in sustaining the dawa in Khorasan.
Right.
There has to be some element of truth in that, I think.
Yeah, that's very interesting, because it's and I mean, I always thought that's, maybe that's because I'm a man from the 21st century, but I always thought that a succession crisis was maybe not enough to explain a split, and that if there are no other matters or no other issues, then maybe the split would not have happened. But yeah, that's just speculation. Okay, and just to conclude, maybe a final question on what this, does this account that you unearthed provide us with new perspectives on the Fatimid rule and the power of the Fatimid courts? And more in general, does it allow for a re-evaluation of the Fatimid Caliphate in general, and al-Mustansir's reign in particular?
Yeah, no, there is a lot of information that we need to get out of it. Yes, it has quite a bit to say. It has a lot more than we suspected. I suspected. So I didn't pay any particular attention. But it's full of information about Badr al-Jamali and the Coptic Church, and about later things. And I have a student at the university who's actually writing a paper, a thesis, on the information about the Jews and the Crusades that comes out of this particular work, because it does have information. For example, the king of Jerusalem, Baldwin, invaded Egypt in 11-something, and he died in the process. And what's interesting, he died in Egypt as he was on this campaign, but he didn't want to be buried in Egypt, so he had already told his people to cut him open and make sure that he could get back to Jerusalem. They cut him open, took out his guts, filled this cavity with salt, and carried the body back to bury in Jerusalem. Now, some of that is in this particular history. So there are details like that can be found there. So it says quite a bit. And the relationship between the Christians and the Muslim rulers. Yeah.
And about the court, the way that the Fatimid court worked on a day-to-day basis, because it's the general idea is that following al-Mustansir's reign, the following caliphs had less political power, and this power was actually taken on by the viziers.
Well, yeah, mostly that's the case, and it's but there are a couple. Al-Hafiz was a bit more hands-on. Most of the rest were not.
And so the involvement of the sister in al-Mustansir's succession, you're not convinced by this particular point?
No, what I'm saying is if the sister's involved, then it wasn't just al-Afdal. Unless the two of them had agreed somehow.
Yeah, but there are still many unanswered questions, like why al-Mustaʿli? I mean, you suggest that it's because he's the youngest, and that he's easier to manipulate.
So my calculation, and I've done a very careful examination of, I can come up with the names of 17 sons. And Abul Qasim Ahmad was the very youngest one. So he was the last one. But he was born under the dictatorship of Badr al-Jamali, for example. He would have been young and pliable. That's the theory in any case. And if he's a brother-in-law of al-Afdal, various things like that.
Yes, so that wasn't clear to me. Was he already al-Afdal's brother-in-law when he?
Well, so the question is, was the marriage completed?
Yes.
And I'm not sure. I think I have checked and discovered that there's no evidence it was ever consummated. It was arranged. It may have been contracted without consummation. I don't know.
All right. Well, thank you very much, Paul. And
thank you for interesting questions. You've hit upon really important points there.
Thanks. Well, I mean, your research is very stimulating. Thank you.
Thank you, Paul, and thank you, Fârès. And we will take a few questions from the audience now, if you both agree. So the first, I have a few comments from Khalil Andani, Paul, to whom you referred at the beginning of the talk. He says, does a designation at moment of death make any sense for a Fatimid ruler to do? Do we find prior caliphs like Mahdi, Qaim, Mansur, Muiz, Zahir making a deathbed appointment at time of death?
So the answer, as far as I know, there is no other case that I know of those earlier ones. The designations were always kind of, well, it's a little bit complicated in some cases, but most of them were not in that case. But what is important here is that by that time, there is the notion that is the most important designation. That is the way it's passed. And that the Hidayah al-Amariyah makes a big case about that no designation counts except the one at the moment of death.
Thank you. And the second is rather a comment. So he says, thanks for engaging talk. The Sarguzasht you quote is unreliable, see Ladakh, and contains anachronisms and isn't original to Hassan. For example, it mentions the appointment of Mustaʿlis before it even happened, and it's contradicted by many other reporters, including Shahrastani, who says Hassan met the Imam and even Magrizi. So it's a comment.
Right.
Then, yeah, I'm just reading the question as they appear on the screen. Dr. Khurshid Sanakhan, a couple of questions here. First, the document you are using was written by a person following the Coptic faith. Has this been checked through some scientific method, such as carbon dating and or other, to estimate its age?
So it isn't the document. It's what we've got is a series of biographies that are written by people through the centuries. I'm not sure about a particular manuscript of a later period. it wasn't, the Arabic wasn't, the part that I'm talking about, the Arabic was not published until 1959. But it exists. I don't know exactly, but there's no reason to doubt its authenticity insofar as, I mean, we don't have another or any reason to doubt it. That would be my answer.
Right.
It says
And
what it says, that's all.
and the another question from the same person. The fact that the mother of the Fatimid Caliph al-Mustaʿlis, Rasad, or Rasad, who was herself a Coptic in origin, so in your view, considering this fact, what is the possibility of this document written later during his 7 years of rule under the influence of Mustaʿlis and his family?
No, wait. So Rashad is the mother of al-Mustansir, right? That's who. I don't know who the mother
Right.
of al-Mustaļi was.
Right. Yeah.
And Rashad is a Nubian or something. She might have been Muslim. I don't know. I've never heard her religion mentioned.
Right. The question from Azim Alibhai, is there mention of Sayyida al-Sharifa and her role in any of the other sources pertaining to the matter of contested succession?
So the only thing that I know other than this is that when we get to the Hadaya and that whole episode, which is 25 years later, the sister of Nizar, who is involved in that, does mention the aunt and her role in that succession. That's the only other thing that I know of.
Thank you. A question from Kainat Jalaluddin. What is the value of the writing of Coptic clerk in the employ of Al-Afdal's administration, meekly supporting the Mustaļi claim, albeit without doing so overtly? Would he not be presumed to be simply seeking to curry favor with his employer, who he describes as being so sorry, I can't see the end of the
Okay.
Yeah.
I don't know that this particular author was in the employ of al-Afdal. We know he's a clerk, but we don't know what bureau he's a clerk in or anything. He does have a very favorable view of al-Afdal, that is obvious, but we don't know the connection there. And I'm not sure that he's totally in favor of the rule of al-Mustaļi. That is, the author, you could say, was maybe neutral in this issue.
Right. Next question from Randy Ramel. Are there any philosophical or theological differences, essential or otherwise, that mark the conflict between Nizaris and Mustaļis? Is this just a political issue?
Good. A very good question. And I'm not sure I can make an answer on that one. So in the long run, we do know what happens to the Mustaļi branch and its theological development, its manuscripts. All of that doesn't survive in Egypt, but it does survive in the Yemen, and it's in India. And most of our Arabic manuscripts come from them. So we know a great deal about that. And we also know something about the Nizari development of theology and philosophy and its major people. There is some difference, but there is also some overlap.
Next question from Nurmamat Shoev. Thank you for this wonderful presentation. In your 1995 article on this succession dispute, you used other sources, but the new source in Coptic was not used. In that article, you provided methodological analysis of the succession dispute, but you do not take a stance. If, oh sorry, something happens here on the screen with the images, the messages overlap, and I can't see clearly the question itself. Just
Yeah, I can read it if you want. If you were to write,
if you see the end of it, please.
yes. If you were to write the same article again, what would you have changed, as this source gives a different dimension to it?
Yeah, so my article from quite a long time ago, there are a few things in this particular section that I would change, but I'd have to go back and do the details. But basically, much of the information I already got out of Makrizi, and it's the same that we find in this Coptic source. So there are a few changes, but basically, I think we're still in the same area. I recently thought about exactly what this question, what kind of answer, but I'd have to go back and look carefully to find out.
In those times, sorry, a question from Nagi Premji. In those times, would the eldest son not be presumed to be the successor, especially in the event of no clear designation?
No. So to start with, there is no presumption that it's the eldest son. But imagine if an imam, you know, in the case of Al-Amir, for example, he did not produce a son for year after year after year after year. And then when one son is born, automatically everybody assumes that will be the successor. If there's only one son, obviously, that will be the successor. But if there are two sons or three sons or six sons, then it has to be designation. That's the kind of assumption. And the case is Ja'far Sadiq again. Remember that it's not the eldest son that he designates. Ja'far Sadiq designated Ismail, the second son, not the eldest son. So the eldest son is Abdullah, and Ja'far is Abu Abdullah. But there's no designation in our historical record of Abdullah. It's only of Ismail. Nobody wrote the rules. So there isn't a document that tells us exactly what we have to find. We have to go through all the historical cases and see what happened.
Given that the victors, the question from Amir Jan Muhammad, given that the victors write the history and potentially destroys the opposite narrative, is it surprising that there is a paucity of details of Nizar's designation?
Yes, that's a good point. It is quite possible that, at least in the Egyptian case, that we don't have anything left that might have said. And as somebody has pointed out to me, the fact that so the succession, when you find in Makrizi and other places like that, the story, the succession could be Nizar, it could be Abdallah, and eventually it's Abu Qasim Ahmad. So why not Abdallah? And there were people who favored Abdallah. That kind of complicates it, and it seems to be an Egyptian version of this. And the role, what happens with Abdallah is if Abdallah is taken seriously in this, then that kind of mitigates Nizar's claim. So you could say this is an Egyptian historiography, something. But the Mustaʿlis, the Tayyibis, don't recognize the succession of Abdullah either.
A question from Amin Rahmani. When did this Coptic writer actually wrote this? Was it in 1094 or much later? Was
the particular biography ends in 1102, because that's when Patriarch Michael IV ceased. But then he wrote a biography of the next patriarch, and that ends in 1118. So my guess is that Ibn al-Khulzumi wrote later, like 1118, and that may be close to the end of his life. We don't know.
So actually the question is, could it be that he was in Cairo and he may have been forced to write what he wrote? As you say that Al-Afdal was trying to suppress any sympathizers to Nizar and executed them.
It's possible, but so Al-Afdal was suppressing anybody in favor of Abdullah, not Nizar. But we don't know. I mean, in the sense, by the time it gets very complicated, and there's a lot of it we just don't know. So you're asking, could the person have been writing in favor of what? Mustaʿlis? I'm not sure that he was in favor of Mustaʿlis. For example, another interesting feature of his account is that he seems to know what's happening in Cairo, but he is very poorly informed about what's happening in Alexandria, just a detail. So I assume that when he's talking about anything in Cairo, he has good sources. When he's talking about what happened in Alexandria, it's distant for him. So he's using somebody else who's told him, and hearsay maybe, and all of that. His account of what happened in Alexandria is half complete, from what we can tell. I don't know if that answers the question or
not. A question from Karim Javan. Sorry, that keeps jumping on my screen for some reason. Say there is also an account of a monk who supported Nizar in the account of Dustur al-Munajjimin, who met with Nizar on his way to Alexandria. Do you think there is a link between your source and this account?
I don't know about that one. I think I've just heard about it recently, so I haven't seen it.
Question from Firdos Farooq Amiri. Sira al-Jawthar, if I'm spelling it correctly.
Sira
Jawthar tells us of at least 3 implicit nas done and given as a secret to Jawthar by Imam al-Mahdi, al-Qaim, and al-Mansur. He even reports al-Qaim saying that we do not bury the earlier predecessor before designating our successor. What is your view on that? What would have been the reason for that secrecy? Probably the safety of the Imam's life.
Well, I've written about this. The one that's particularly interesting to me is the case of al-Mu'izz, because what he apparently confided the succession idea to Jawthar, that it would be Abdullah. And then there's this story that's quite interesting. So Jawthar was told the succession would be Abdullah, but he was told to keep it secret at the pain of his life or whatever. But one day it's a formal ceremony, and he's asked to go out and greet the sons of al-Mu'izz. But what happens is that when he goes to greet Abdullah, he makes a complete faux pas in the fact that he does what he's not supposed to do, kind of indicating that he's greeting the Imam or the Imam to be. So he's, rather than keeping it secret, he's exposing it. And he was kind of condemned for that. Not seriously, but. So the secrecy was to keep it so they could change it if they needed it. That's my theory. It's my theory now.
A question from Yasir Jamil. Why al-Afdal agreed to give a safe passage to Imam Nizar, as it seems Imam Nizar was the enemy of al-Afdal. Also, what happened to the safe entry to Cairo, which was promised by al-Afdal?
So what happened, if you're, okay, so this is coming from an account where the guy is really a fan of al-Afdal. So he puts in this thing about when Aftakin, and they ask for safe passage. Al-Afdal, being very generous, says, yeah, sure, we'll give you safe passage. And then he tells them, go back to Cairo, but don't go into the city until I get there so that I can make sure you're safe. But in fact, they go into the city, or when they go into the city, then the new Imam in Cairo condemns them, and that's it. I think that answers. I'm sorry.
Yes. Amin Rahmani asks, if he was not in Cairo, what is the source on the basis of which he wrote what you presented here?
No, our author was in Cairo. It's when he's writing about Alexandria that he doesn't seem to know enough. I'm assuming that he lived in Cairo. He was a clerk in some bureaucracy, well-connected, probably a person of some wealth, and that he knew people. And so he used first-person accounts that came to him. We don't know any more than that.
Another question from Randy Ramal. After all, the Shi'i-Sunni division is not just a matter of succession, but theological as well. The authoritative role of the Imams in interpreting the Quran and guiding the community.
So, yeah, absolutely. What happens in the theory, at least, is, okay, the Imam, the current Imam, is Masum, infallible, impeccable. And he's given that thing and is guarded by God. So when he makes a designation of a successor, the Nas, that is the same as God choosing the successor. It has the equivalence. So that's the theology behind this.
From Meps Merali, based on the account, the designation of al-Mustaʿlis does not appear to be by the way of Nas if it is based simply on the account of the sister. Does that count as Nas?
Excellent question. Yes, excellent. That's a very nice thing to raise at this point. So we could bring in the theory of the Mustawda. So there is this theory in some Shi'i discourse about how succession can be passed by you tell somebody who then conveys the succession. So you could have even a case where you have an imam between two imams who is not the real imam, but is a placeholder imam, if you like, a mustawda. It's just part of various theories. They do come up and they are mentioned.
Amin Rahmani asks, what were the relationships of Fatimids vizier with the Coptic areas?
In this particular account, it looks like with Bedr al-Jamali and his son al-Afdal, there were very, very good relations. And they really, the Christians, the Copts, really appreciated Badr al-Jamali and his son. That they struggled previously, particularly in the Ayyam Shidda and so on, but this was almost like a golden age for them. And they say this in this history, how wonderful it is to have Badr al-Jamali back and making everything nice and being nice to us and talking to us and having our bishops come to meet him and things like that.
And the question, which is probably related to this, is from Dr. Nargis Ali-Virani. Were the Copt patriarchs appointed by the Imam Caliphs or the powers to be? If yes, this patriarch would have had then on to rely on Badr al-Jamali and al-Afdal's continued patronage for his position. Would that explain the skewed account in their favor, perhaps?
I don't think that happens. At least it's worth kind of checking to see whether any of these viziers ever interfered in the succession with the Copts. But usually in the account of this particular long history of the patriarchs, the new patriarch is chosen by the bishops of the church. So my favorite account takes place, and it's from this source. So the Coptic patriarch is supposed to be the least politically inclined person in the community of religious people. So a priest or a bishop who has the least interest in politics. Totally otherworldly. So this is a famous account. They're choosing a new patriarch in Alexandria, and all the bishops are meeting in the church, and they're trying to decide. And of course, there's politics and various kinds of things going on. There is a poor monk who is there, but his duty is to, he's a gopher, and he's obliged to go to the back of the church, climb up a ladder, and retrieve a jug of vinegar. On the way down with the jug of vinegar, he drops it. It doesn't break. A miracle. And he becomes the Pope, the patriarch, because that was a sign. Do you see? So I'm not sure politics. That's just one case. It's my favorite case. So.
And last question, because we're at the end of our time, I'm reminded, and we have to stop here. I hope the Zoom session will not cut us off. So Shiraz Hajiani asks, Paul, thank you for your presentation and attention to this topic. How do you explain that the much later account of Makrizi includes some perspectives of the Nizaris, but Ibn al-Kulzumi does not? Is the letter conveying a smoothed out accepted official history in his time in the Mustalian domains, as opposed to an independent eyewitness account?
An interesting question. Somebody could check that. I've never checked it. So I'm not sure that there is any particular, that Makrizi has an agenda. I'm not sure he does. But it's worth checking. Somebody would have to go over very carefully and see if there's evidence. I don't see it in Ibn al-Kulzumi's thing. He doesn't seem to have an agenda, except really he is in favor of al-Afdal. He thinks al-Afdal is wonderful. That's obvious. It's embarrassingly obvious sometimes.
Thank you, Paul. And it's a shame because I can see that there are still lots of interesting questions remaining, but unfortunately we have to stop here. We're not we can't continue the Zoom session beyond the 1 hour and a half.
Well, you can always email me. awalker@uchicago.edu, and I'll try to answer if I can.
Yes. So, and you can email me if you want for Paul's email address. So thanks again, Paul. Thank you, Fârès.
Thank
Thank
you.
you very much.
Thanks to everyone who joined this session for your wonderful questions. Apologies again that we cannot answer all the questions. And also thanks to everyone who supported the preparation of this session behind the scenes, and especially to Nushin Premji, our academic projects and events manager. So here we have to stop the session, and thanks again for your participation, and I hope that you will join the forthcoming sessions in Islamic History and Thought lecture series. Thank you.
Thank you.